Hello, everyone. Just doing a quick sound check. Sarah, can you let me know if you can hear me okay?
Yep,
Or
we can.
Patty or Aaron, can you let me know that you can hear me?
I can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you. My name is Nicola Vienna. I'm the Housing Tax Credit Supervisor at Minnesota Housing. I'll provide a general overview of the housing tax credits. We'll use the acronym HTC. This refers to the Federal Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program. Next slide, please. Here is the agenda for this overview. I will cover program basics and what I think you need to know if you are new to the program. So we'll cover an overview of the program, the Qualified Allocation Plan, or QAP, types of credits, and eligibility and requirements. We'll also cover the application process and scoring. Then I'll finish with sharing where to go for more information and next steps as far as training. Next slide, please. So the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program is one of the principal federal mechanisms contained within tax law for the acquisition, substantial rehabilitation, and new construction of low-income rental housing. The HTC program provides tax credits to companies and individuals that invest in affordable rental housing, reducing their federal tax liability by the amount of the tax credit for 10 years. In exchange for this reduction in tax liability, investors purchase the tax credits and agree to keep units affordable to households at certain income levels. In today's market, a dollar of tax credit sells for around 85 to 95 cents, depending on varying factors like location and area market analysis. The sale proceeds from the tax credits are then invested in new construction of affordable housing or acquisition and rehab of existing properties. HTC is outlined in the Internal Revenue Code, Section 42, and the Internal Revenue Service Guidance. Next slide, please. The IRS requires every HTC allocator to have a plan for allocating credits to developments, which is the Qualified Allocation Plan, QAP. There are certain IRS and state requirements for what must be included in the plan. For example, every allocator must provide preference for projects located in low-income areas that contribute to community revitalization. Minnesota Housing's QAP is made up of the QAP document and the self-scoring worksheet. These documents detail the rules for how HTCs will be distributed throughout the state, what types of projects will be eligible for set-asides of credits, how funding rounds will be administered, what rules and procedures applicants and Minnesota Housing must abide by, and what priorities we will be using when considering projects to be funded and selected. Minnesota Housing's QAP is also the mechanism that determines the funding priorities for all the funding resources awarded through the annual multifamily consolidated RFP. All applications are scored according to the priorities contained in the self-scoring worksheet and then ranked based on score, similar to what Summer talked about. Every point claimed by an applicant on the self-scoring worksheet is a commitment that is memorialized in the HTC or the deferred declaration. We'll provide training on the self-scoring worksheet and the scoring wizard in the coming weeks. Be looking for an e-news to register, and the registration links are now on the website on the application resources page that Aaron referred to earlier. Next slide, please. There are two types of tax credits, commonly referred to as the 9% and the 4% tax credits. Applicants who apply under Minnesota Housing's consolidated RFP may apply under a competitive process for 9% tax credits or for deferred gap funding with a 4% financial structure. Requests for 9% credits are typically 3 or 4 times greater than the amount of credits available. Projects that have received an allocation of tax-exempt volume limited bonds from Minnesota Management and Budget, or MMB, may apply for 4% HTCs through a pipeline process called the 4% only. The HTC is designed to subsidize either a 30% or a 70% of the low-income unit costs in a project. The 30% subsidy, which is known as the automatic 4% tax credit, covers new construction that uses additional subsidies or the acquisition costs of existing buildings. The 70% subsidy or 9% tax credit supports new construction without any additional federal subsidies, but you can apply for deferred funding through Minnesota Housing. 9% credits have a higher applicable percentage than 4% credits, allowing for more basis to be captured and translating to more equity or syndication proceeds to the development. The fact that the credits are limited and have a higher rate makes 9% credits extremely competitive. Next slide, please. So projects must set aside a minimum number of units that meet both rent and income restrictions to qualify for HTCs for each year of the HTC period. A project must, for a specific period of time, meet one of the following minimum tests. So we've got the 2050 test. A minimum of 20% of the residential units must be both rent restricted and occupied by individuals whose income is at or below 50% of the multifamily tax subsidy project or MTSP limits. The 40-60 test is a minimum of 40% of the residential units must be both rent restricted and occupied by individuals whose income is at or below 60% of the MTSP limits adjusted for family size. And then average income test is a minimum of 40% of the units in the project are both rent restricted and occupied by individuals whose imputed income average at initial occupancy is at or below 60% MTSP limits. Now we have more information on the average income test on our website for more information. Next slide, please. So units must comply with requirements around household income, rent limits, and property requirements. Review the qualified allocation plan and the underwriting standards for additional information. HTCs have a compliance period of at least 15 years, plus the extended use period, which can range from 15 to 35 years. In the self-scoring worksheet, projects can agree to extend the term of the declaration for points in the RFP. HTCs are monitored by our compliance team at Minnesota Housing, and HTC recipients are required to submit an annual certification to Minnesota Housing and agree to a periodic inspections. And you can learn more about this on our website under the compliance section. All right, next slide. Minnesota Housing awards or allocates housing tax credits in two ways. 9% and 4% plus deferred funding are available during the consolidated RFP, and 9% tax credits are available in round 2, where applications are due in February or March each year. Both are competitive processes. During the annual consolidated RFP, projects can submit a dual application, an application for 9% credits and an application for deferred funding with 4% tax credit structure, where Minnesota Housing issues tax-exempt volume limited bonds. Since 4% credits generate less equity and syndication proceeds than 9% credits, typically a development is left with a capital gap needing to be funded. So that gap can potentially be filled with funding sources from Minnesota Housing and our funding partners. So projects can apply under this structure in the event that Minnesota Housing is the HTC allocating agency. And projects in certain locations may be able to receive tax-exempt bonds and tax credits from a sub-allocator and subsequently request deferred funding. So prior to submitting an application, we highly recommend a model that with the financial structure of a project as a 9% and a 4% with deferred, as many types of projects, including preservation, workforce, and even supportive housing, may be able to support investor equity under both structures. Submitting a dual application during the RFP also increases a project's chances of being funded. Switching gears a little bit to the 4% only, the 4% only tax credits are available year-round for bonds issued pursuant to an allocation of state volume cap by MMB, Minnesota Management Budget. MMB is the primary apportionment agency for the allocation of tax-exempt volume limited bonds, and these bonds issued in an amount sufficient enough to finance at least 50% of the basis of the development costs allow a development to access 4% tax credits. So upon receipt of just the 4% credits from Minnesota Housing, these projects are able to close without needing additional deferred funding from Minnesota Housing. All right, next slide, please. So I'll go into a bit more detail on the 9% tax credits, which is a more limited resource. Per federal statute, 9% tax credits are allocated to states based on the state population and a per capita formula. The 2023 Minnesota allocation is estimated to be $14.8 million. And the Minnesota housing allocation is $11 million. Our QAP also requires us to have set-asides for nonprofit entities and projects using rural development financing. You can see our QAP for more information. In Minnesota, state statute outlines rules regarding the tax credit program, including how HTCs are distributed. So state statute establishes Minnesota Housing as the primary allocating agency and also establishes 4 other sub-allocators, so Minneapolis, St. Paul, Dakota County, and Washington County. So projects within these sub-allocator jurisdictions are encouraged to apply for HTCs directly to these sub-allocators. Minnesota Housing administers the HTCs for all other areas outside the jurisdiction of the sub-allocators. Next slide, please. As far as scoring your application, when you apply to the RFP, you will score your project. There are 2 key documents you will need. On our website, they are called the self-scoring worksheet. This is the source of truth. This worksheet will be your main reference tool for understanding the points you claim. And then there's the scoring guide. This guide is the companion document and reference to the self-scoring worksheet. Much of the supporting documentation is listed in the self-scoring worksheet, but the scoring guide contains more detail and clarification, so you'll want to use both. You will enter your scores into the scoring wizard in the multifamily portal. Once you enter your scores, you upload your documents into the portal. And then once you submit your application, Minnesota Housing will also score your application. We will offer 2 separate trainings in the next few weeks. The Scoring Wizard training, this will be offered next week, Wednesday, April 26th. We will be sending out an e-news later this week. We'll also to register, and we'll also record it. And then we'll have the self-scoring worksheet training on how to score and how Minnesota Housing will score your application. So be sure to check your e-news this week to find those registrations, and they're also on the website. So we encourage you to request that technical assistance and attend our scoring training so you can understand the scoring materials. Next slide, please. To find more information, visit our website, mnhousing.gov, and go to the multifamily rental partners on the right-hand side. In the beige toolbar at the top, go to Housing Tax Credit page where you'll find the current QAP, the self-scoring worksheet, and other helpful information. And then visit that application resources page that Erin pointed out to find registration links for those trainings. You scroll all the way down to the bottom to training, and you'll find it located there. So thank you so much for listening, and thank you for your partnership. And I will now turn it over to Summer.